Hi, I'm Anne and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about classics. If there is one genre I love more than all others, it is classics. Classics are amazing. But I feel like when you say the word classic, certain books come to mind, whether it is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, or Shakespeare's plays, or even more modern classics like 1984 or Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, or even a child's book like Chronicles of Narnia. But because I love classics so much, I've read not only just the really popular classics, but also a little bit lesser known classics. So today I'm going to share with you my favorite lesser known classics. These are the ones that I never see talked about, even though they are amazing books and they definitely deserve more attention than, say, books that are a little bit overhyped. I'm not saying that Pride and Prejudice is a horrible book, but it is a little bit overhyped. So I have 10 books to share with you today, so let's get right into it. Also, this will be in no order. The first one is a book I feel like deserves so much more attention. It is definitely the greatest pirate novel of all time, and it seems to be underappreciated, and that is Captain Blood by Raphael Sabatini. This book was originally written in Italian and then later translated into English. It tells the story of Peter Blood, who is in England or Scotland, I believe, and he is accused of a crime he did not commit, shipped off to the Americas to endure forced labor, which was really common in the early colonies. He ends up escaping and taking a bunch of other indentured servants with him, and they end up seizing a ship and becoming pirates. This is an exceptional book. It's first and foremost a high seas adventure, but it is also a romance as well as an understanding of this time period and how harsh it was, and in a sense an understanding of Captain Blood, because in the beginning he starts off as a very good moral character, and because of the immorality of others, in a sense, he becomes immoral. And later on, when confronted by the woman he is falling in love with, she calls him nothing but a thief and a pirate. And that, in a sense, settles deep into his soul and really affects him for the rest of the book as he decides, well, have I become what I hated in the beginning? So it's a really interesting book, both because of the characters as well as just because of the adventure. So I highly recommend it. The second one is more for Christians out there, I guess, and that is the Robe by Lloyd C. Douglas. It is set during Jesus's time, where this young slave as well as this centurion who is Roman ends up witnessing these miracles having to do with this robe that was Jesus's. And I would not say, don't get me wrong, the religion aspects of this book are really well handled, but the best part of this book is the characters for me. It starts off with Marcellus being this very young but idealistic centurion from this wealthy Roman family, and his slave and probably best friend is Demetrius, and they are close friends, but circumstances drive them apart. This book deals with a lot of the ideas of slavery and a deep examination of power, how a person should never be able to own a person. Demetrius eventually becomes free, and it is a really great and exceptional book, even if you are not Christian, but you're just interested in ancient Roman society and how power dynamics worked, and also just want to enjoy really well developed characters. I highly recommend this book. The next book I want to talk about, I feel like I've talked about way too much, and that is The Bitter Tea of General Yen by Grace Zaring Stone. So this book was published in the 30s, and it tells the story of Megan, this young missionary who comes to meet her fiance in China. She ends up almost getting killed by this mob that has broken out into fighting because of the conflict between the communists and the nationalists in China. She ends up being rescued by this kind of mysterious man called General Yen, and she befriends him. I wouldn't say this is a fully romantic book, but there are some hints that it could be. They made this absolutely horrific movie adaptation of it in the 30s, which if you have ever watched, the actor they picked out to be General Yen was white, and in order to make him look Asian, they put this like weird tape on his eyes, and it takes cultural appropriation to a whole new level. And it was truly horrific to watch. But this book is amazing, and it also deals with the idea of, is tradition completely meaningless, or is tradition everything, and trying to balance progress with tradition. It is a really exceptional book. Sad ending though. The next book is a very short book, and that is The Lilies of the Field by William E. Barnett. So this book tells of a ex-GI soldier. He has just come back from war, and obviously he's black, and so he's dealt with some racism in the past. He ends up traveling across America and meeting these adorable German nuns who are trying to build their church, and he ends up building their church for them. It is a very, very sweet tale. It's definitely more Christian, but it's not necessarily likable just because of the Christian aspects. Like, you could be an atheist and go into this book and enjoy it, because it is honestly a tale about friendship between him and these nuns. It's a very short book. It's only a little bit over 100 pages, and I highly recommend it. The next classic is a relatively recent publication. It only came out in 1970, which I feel like is not that long ago, but also my view of a classic is if it is more than 50 years old, and since it is 2021 this year, that would mean that this would be over 50 years old. So I'm going to go with The Hour of the Horde by Gordon R. Dickson. So this book follows this human man who's picked out of all of humanity to be trained on this special mission to stop this highly advanced horde, which is going through the galaxy and taking out all the planets. So all these different confederations and worlds come together and send their best men on board to fight for them, and he just happens to be one from Earth. So most of this book has to do with him getting to know and gaining the trust and gaining power on the ship that he has been put on to train to fight this horde, as well as being able to problem solve how to take down this massive horde that is like 10 to 20 times the size of their ships. So pretty much he's going on a suicide mission, and it is an exceptional book, not just because it's a fun sci-fi, but also because the characters are just exceptionally done, and it's definitely made me want to read more of Dickson's work. The next book is also published in 1970, but I feel like out of any on this list is definitely the most well-known, and that is Deryni Rising by Katherine Kurtz. So this is the first book of Chronicles of Deryni. I tried to read the second book and I really didn't like it, so the series does go down from here. But I highly recommend this book. It pretty much stands as a standalone, so you could read this and not read anything else and still really enjoy it. And this book follows this very young prince who is to be king and his advisor, who are kind of trying to balance power grabs with protecting their kingdom against some evil people. And I won't get too into it because spoilers, but this is an exceptional fantasy book. There's a lot of high fantasy series from this era that I feel like have been really forgotten, and this is probably one that is more popular. I feel like general fantasy fans have probably heard of this series because it is kind of big. I definitely feel like compared to a lot of other classic fantasies that this one is less heard of, so I highly recommend it. The next book is one that I have not heard anyone talk about it, and this was published in the early 1900s. It is called The Singing Tree by Kate Sirity. So this book follows these two cousins. Most of the book follows them, as well as just their family and town in general. They live in Hungary, and it follows their experiences through World War I. As you know, it starts before the war, and then it goes to when they are adults after the war, and it is a really sweet but sobering story. They go through a lot, but it is, I would say it's a little bit of a family saga, but it's mostly just about these two cousins. There is a little bit romance. It's very similar to Anne of Green Gables, but I feel like this is better than so many other more popular classics that I have read that I wish that more people knew about this book, because it is an exceptional narrative about war and loss and family and love, and it is a really great book. The next book is the only epic poetry that I have on this list, and that is The Ballad of the White Horse by G.K. Chesterton. This follows the tale of King Alfred in the 9th century, I believe. He defended England against the Danes that were trying to invade them. So this is mostly a story of battles. It is very similar if you have read the Iliad. It's more like a more modern feel of the Iliad. This is an exceptional book, especially I'm a massive fan of G.K. Chesterton, but he's not an easy author to get into. His works are quite dense. So what I love about this book is it's very easy to read, especially if you have read any classic epic poetry, whether it is Beowulf or the Iliad. They are quite hard to digest, but when it comes to this book, it is very easy to read. It doesn't use extremely difficult language to understand. I read this back in high school and I had no trouble following along with the story. So especially if you are interested in reading more classic poetry, this is a must read. And I feel like too few people know about this book. The next two books I do not own in physical form. The next one is I, Claudius by Robert Graves. So this is a book that was written in the 1930s, and it follows the life of Claudius, the Roman emperor, from when he is a young boy all the way until he becomes emperor. The book ends with him becoming emperor. I attempted to read the second book, which is Claudius the God and his wife Messalina, but I did not like that book half as much. But this book was exceptional, and if you are interested at all in classic antiquity, if you like dark academia, or you like Aristotle or the old philosophers, I highly recommend reading this book. It takes a deep dive in understanding the society, the power grabs, the conflict in Rome. This, of course, takes place in around, say, 50 AD. So it is near the fall of the Roman Empire, and it is an exceptionally detailed narrative that, while it is, in a sense, fiction, it does a good job in capturing the essence of Roman life during that time. The next book is a book that I've heard a lot of people have mixed feelings about. I loved it, but I've heard a lot of people did not like it, and that is Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol. So this was published back in the 1840s, and it was originally Russian, but I obviously read it in English. It follows this man who is traveling around the countryside in Russia buying dead souls. So during that time, you would have census records that were taken every few years, but between those years, for example, if you had a serf die, and they had serfs back then in Russia, you would still have to pay taxes on them until the census records took a new census, and then you would be free of the taxes you had to pay because you owned them. It's a very, very weird time. I wouldn't say serfdom is the same as slavery, but boy, was it close. And this man comes into town, and he goes to all these wealthy, powerful houses and says to them, I would like to buy your dead serfs. In a sense, the people who have died, but their names are still on the record as being owned by this wealthy person. So for them, it's pretty much him taking off their hands the taxes they would have to pay because they still have that name on their record. So, of course, they're happy about it, but everyone is really confused as to why he is doing this. So it's a little bit of a mystery, but it's very much an examination of Russia during that time, whether it is the vast variance between classes, between the serfs and the nobility, but also just simply between those wealthy people who didn't have land and didn't have serfs versus the nobility who did have land and did have serfs, and how you couldn't really have much class mobility in that society. And it is a really fascinating book. The characters are also very funny. You can't take them completely seriously because they're absolute caricatures of very weird people, but it is a very funny book to read in some senses, but also very sobering because you understand what was going on in Russia during that time. And the final book on my list is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I feel like, again, this is slightly better known than a lot of these on the list. This was published in the mid-1800s, and it follows this young woman, Margaret, whose family is from southern England and moved north to a cotton factory town where she experiences how horrific factory towns were, as well as she meets this factory owner and clashes with him, named John Thornton. This is an exceptional love story, but it's also, again, a very interesting examination of what was going on in England with the conflict of the cotton mills and the North and South divide between those who lived in the country and farmed and those who lived in factory towns and had a very rough and harsh life. It's a really exceptional book, and I highly recommend it. They made a 2004 miniseries of it starring Richard Armitage. The miniseries is really good, and if you're not interested in reading the book, I highly recommend the miniseries. So there's my list of lesser known classic books that I believe more people should read. Have you read or heard of any of these books? I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments. If you have any of your favorite classic books that pretty much no one ever talks about, I'd love to hear more ideas of great lesser known classics that I should read. Thank you for watching. Have a great week, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!